So that really leads us to today. And as I mentioned, I do want to spend a little bit of time on Mark and his career, because he has really spent time both in the public sector, working in government on security issues, and he has taken that really valuable experience to bear for corporations and risk committees and corporate communicators. So Mark co-founded his company Pendulum, focused on disrupting that threat of harmful narratives that is posed socially quite broadly. He was previously Chief of Staff of the National Security Innovation Network, which is a U.S. Department of Defense program office with the mission of building networks of innovators to create new solutions for national security problems. He was also Director of Policy at the U.S. Election Assistance Commission during the 2016 and 2018 foreign interference in the U.S. election crisis. At the EAC, he was the agency's staff lead for all national security issues, including intergovernment and intra-government coordination, policy design, and policy implementation. Before the EAC, he was the co-founder and the executive director of Revive My Vote, a voting rights NGO that specialized in building solutions with government organizations to really focus on the integrity of elections. Mark has a JD from the William & Mary Law School and a BA from the University of Tennessee, and he's a published author in the topics of critical infrastructure, election law, and government policy making. So I just offer that contextually so you can, I don't know, just interpret some of what he shares with us today. Full disclosure, two things, full disclosure. We share an alma mater in common, although we only recently discovered that. So he graduated from William & Mary Law School, and I went to undergraduate at William & Mary, and I'm on the board there now. So we're excited that we have that in common. And then very recently, our companies did enter into a mutual agreement where we are co-creating, we're looking at bespoke solutions for clients to help them really understand their disinformation threat and risk. So we're not intending to be particularly commercial here today, but I thought it was only fair for me to tell you that if you didn't already know. So anyway, thank you, Mark, for being here. It's wonderful to have this opportunity to chat. And I thought we should level set on how you currently see the threat landscape. How broad is it? What's the impact and cost? And how worried should we be, really?
All right. Well, we'll start with the easy question then. First of all, thank you for the invitation to be here. It's an absolute pleasure to join you and everybody in the room here for this conversation. I think that one of the things about the landscape as we start to scope out the question is that the landscape has changed in a couple of different ways. One is that we're all sitting in rooms like this talking about this. This is not a new threat, it's not a new risk. It is one that is moving faster than it has ever moved before, and it has the opportunity to create higher impacts on companies than ever before. But 5 and 10 years ago, we weren't sitting in rooms talking about this. So I think we're probably, like you said, the Oppenheimer to the Barbenheimer here, but at the same time, I do think that there is some hope and that we are having these conversations and we are starting to dive into the issue in a real way. Now, with the light of the tunnel at first, right, I think we should talk about what the threat landscape looks like. Today, the mis and disinformation space, we see this in our data, is starting to move in the same trajectory that the cyber and the cybersecurity space moved in. Originally, the ability to create an information attack or the ability to create an information or a harmful narrative or a mis and disinformation narrative was kind of beholden to the largest entities in the world. Large nation states, or if you really wanted to put a lot of money behind a campaign, you could get one out the door. Today, a 20-year-old with an iPhone and a TikTok account can create a news story about an executive, a company, or a product in about 30 seconds and spread it over 9 different social platforms, and it can be viral by midnight. We see this in the commercial and the opportunity side of the equation. We see the ability for new songs and products to go viral overnight, and we celebrate the success of this. We also see the smallest pockets of communities in the world starting to spread information and catching into the information infrastructure that exists in larger spaces and spread very nefarious narratives about executives and companies very, very quickly. I think the other part of this that has really changed, though, that is important for framing here, and unfortunately this isn't, I think, good news either, but is that the threat target landscape has really expanded in scope to include the majority of industries, the majority of products that are out there. Now, some are going to experience it in different ways, and we can dive into that as it goes through here. But the world of this doesn't happen to me because I'm not big enough, or this doesn't happen to me because I'm not in the news, it doesn't exist anymore. And I think that it's an unfortunate part of this, but it's something that we have to talk about as we dive in.
I think that's right. And I think that there are certain moments in a company's life where there is more susceptibility when they are prominently on the global stage, or when they have a CEO who has stepped out on a particular issue, or when they even have a product that's in extraordinary demand. And then, of course, there are industries where there's more acute risk, especially those involved in infrastructure like transportation and energy and healthcare and what have you. Given that our audience is full of communication experts and people who are actively solving for issues and crises on a regular basis, I wanted to talk to you about proactivity versus reactivity. So if you extend the cyber security comparison, our chief information and security officers are having to be very proactive, and they have to have lots of tools in the toolbox, and they have to keep improving those tools, and they have to have lots of different defense because the incursions keep exponentially increasing. And especially for those, I'm on the board of one of those infrastructure companies, so our CISO is an extraordinary athlete. He has to be, because the threats just keep amplifying. We are, as communicators around issues and crises, we try to be preemptive, and we try to sort of neutralize the terrain and reduce the risk of issues and crises, and that's a big part of the art and science of what we do. But a lot of what we do is very reactive. We have to have superb rapid response mechanisms. And I keep wondering if, in the case of disinformation, in the case of a major disinformation attack, how do we really apply the same standard and practice we've always had around rapid response around issues in crisis? And can we be more preemptive, and can we be more proactive about identifying risk and mitigating risk?
Yeah, I think so, right? I mean, I think that if we think about how to respond in times of crisis, we often think in terms of playbooks, right? We used to talk in terms of a red book, right? We talk in terms of playbooks here. And I don't think that mis and disinformation is any different, right? We have to be prepared for a crisis with a framework for response before the moment that we realize that we're in the crisis. And I love the old phrase, right? If you have to ask yourself if you're in a crisis, you're probably too late in asking the question. And I think that mis and disinformation and harmful narratives are very much a part of this. And I think that when we look at the data, right, and we look at effective response plans, early action is one of the biggest indicators in taking a hold of the situation. And this is, kind of old school knowledge here, but the companies and the entities that are able to engage proactively with the community to not necessarily stifle any sort of speech, but have a voice in the conversation early, are the companies that come out of the situation in the best way possible. That being said, the question is then how? Right? Like, the information landscape is immense. We have communications flowing through all kinds of platforms that are out there. You have everything from like the TikToks of the world to the YouTubes of the world to Twitter and mainstream news and media and major and small publications as they pop up. And it's incredibly easy to produce a new publication now, right?
Yeah, it really is.
The access to resources become democratized. And that's wonderful for the freedom of speech. But what it means is that you also have to be able to catch things incredibly early and then make sense of whether or not you need to be spending resources and time engaging on it. And I think that that's the difficult part of the equation. But what I always love to share with people about what we see in the data is that having a framework at the ready is one of the biggest, and the tools at the ready deployed already are the two biggest factors in getting through things okay.
So let's talk about then where disinformation starts. So if I'm at a company and I don't know it yet, but my CEO is about to be impersonated, and or there is a major disinformation attack that is meant to stop a major commercial strategy of mine, so that a competitor or a different nation state can gain ground. How do I need, as a practitioner, what do I need to understand about how that gets started and where to start to look?
It's an incredibly, I think, timely question because of the last 12 months. We've seen a number of different starting points over the last 12 months play out. And I think what we're seeing is that the access to this style of resources has truly been democratized. So now you have a multi-pronged starting point here. The story can start from something that your company does. The story can start from something that your company has nothing to do with. And this is, I think, the chaotic world that we live in now. There's a major fast food company over the last 2 months that was, which was kind of taken to task because they weren't pro-Palestine enough. And the triggering point for that was blue and white wrappers on their food, right? Now, blue and white wrappers are common wrappers for food and products for a long time, right? However, because of the global events that are going on with Israel and Gaza, they started to pull in this age-old practice of the same style of manufacturing and same style of productization they had used into a new debate. Right, there's a starting point there. Another one, though, could be a major executive leaving a company and making a big statement or intending to try to bring in some harmful narratives because they're upset about the company. It's something that we've seen over the last 24 months as well. I think the thing that we always focus on in the data is that we love to start people from the perspective that whatever's going to be said has already been said somewhere. The question is, can you catch it early enough and understand whether or not you need to spend time and resources on it? Are communities starting to spool up on this issue? Are they starting to gain traction? And is this something that's going to have an impact? And I'd love to just kind of like offer one slightly, I guess, to the name of the summit, right? I'd love to offer a bit of a provocative component on this in that today, we have the best access to fake information of all time. We have the ability to produce fake and compellingly fake information in ways that our human brains and psyches, and the neuroscience backs this, are not able to sift through. So what that means is that now we are in an environment where this narrative can start anywhere, and it can start from anything. And that the idea that good governance is going to be the protection against this, and that you don't need a communications or a monitoring and analysis component part of this, that is yesterday's news.
Yeah. And also, but where does it percolate? Like on the dark web, or like, you know, where do people meet to?
Oh my goodness, everywhere. It's so unfortunate. I mean, it is, yes, the dark web's a huge part of this, right? The dark, but we love the term, I love the term the dark corners of the internet, right? Because there are dark corners of YouTube, there are dark corners of TikTok, there are dark corners of the forums that we talk about and the forums that we don't talk about yet. And the component of this that is, I think, absolutely pressing is that you need coverage in almost every single one of these places to be able to catch something early. What we see that is truly, I think, disturbing is that the actors that push these narratives most regularly are also the best trained actors at avoiding detection. And the number one method that they use is platform switching. So we can take an average kind of set of actors that we would evaluate with the Pendulum platform, the average large nodes in a network, the accounts that are pushing something, sometimes people, sometimes not people, right? Just like botnets and things like that. They, on average, have between 9 and 13 different accounts across 9 to 13 different platforms. And what do they do with those platforms? They've become very good at detecting what will get moderated off the platform, it won't, and then get them to work in concert to push the information through. So you have to be able to see all of these places concurrently in order to even understand the context of the information flow. I think, you know, as you mentioned, right, as you very kindly mentioned, I spent some time in the government in this. And it's the time when I was lucky enough to get to enter this conversation in the government was right around the 2016, 17, and 18 election cycle. And it was full of full-scale harmful narratives and mis and disinformation in society. But it was never like this. The behavioral landscape is completely different now, and it is so much more chaotic. And at that point, we were able to learn lessons, but now we have to say, what does 2023, 24, and 25 look like? Because technology has completely changed the landscape here in a way that did not exist in 2016. And I think the thing is, don't get scared, right? Like, technology can be a part of the solution, but it's also the methodologies that everybody in this room has been relying on for their entire careers that will get us through.
It's a great point, and very reassuring. We need the technological intelligence and the human intelligence as ever to really address this threat. Since you mentioned your public sector service, I do want to shift gears a little bit and talk about the upcoming election. So you've worked previously with the U.S. Election Assistance Commission. What are you seeing for 2024 as we head into the U.S. presidential election? I mean, some other conversations I've been a part of, people have speculated that, the level of intensity, chaos, disinformation, polarization for this election is going to dwarf what we've seen before. But I don't know, maybe that's just sensationalism. What do you think?
I would love if it were sensationalism.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I think that you're kind of creating a nice format for me to follow, right? And that is exactly what we're seeing, and I think that it's exactly what the leading experts who study the pace at the problem and the way that they're moving, that are used to be very quiet experts, are now starting to talk about the issue. But we see it in the data as well that we look at on a day-to-day basis. So 2024 is very different than 2022, right? So we have an election coming up. But let's just take a moment to talk about 2023 in itself as kind of foundation setting. The year's been a little different than I think I planned on it being, and some things we saw coming and some we didn't see coming, right? It's November of 2023, there are two major conflicts in Europe. We had the first run on a financial institution in the United States since the 1930s this year, and we are in a multipolar world. Add to that, the United States, which is the global political battleground, is now going to go into an election year. So what we traditionally would see in an election year is increased velocity of information flow, increased velocity of narratives as they get pushed by campaigns here and there. Some of them probably arguably would have been called mis and disinformation back in the day. I mean, we all remember Dewey beats Truman, right? So we have that traditional arena, but things are going to move faster. But now we have the ability to produce information cheaper. We have the ability to gain traction more effectively because of the rise in technology. And we have now the nice landscape that large language models and foundation models have given us, which is what we all call generative AI now, right? So now we're going to move faster, we're going to produce more information more effectively, and it's going to have all of the trappings of the things that we used to be able to trust. In the middle of that, we have two huge conflicts, and they're not the only global conflicts, but they are certainly dominating the information space, and an election, and the current multipolar world. I think that 2024 is not the easiest year we ever have.
Yeah.
I think that, and that's, I think, the really unfortunate news. I think the other thing that has changed was that in 2020 and 2022, our political landscape changed. The rules that we played by changed. I think that what we saw was that individual companies getting dragged into debates, not for positives, but as targets to win votes, was something that became commonplace. We saw the first mentions by politicians of individuals in the United States. We never would have seen a US president call out an individual in the past. It was completely out of bounds.
Yeah.
Now, as we look at 2024, these have all become commonplace, and both sides have started to play this game.
Yeah.
So we have a no-holds-barred fight in the middle of a hurricane that's moving about 100 miles an hour in 2024.
Yeah. And I think our audience understands and appreciates just how distracting that is also in the workplace, and that the social and political and cultural swirl is absorbing all of us, and that it is creating more polarization. It's making it more difficult. I mean, disinformation and polarization are synergistic.
Yes.
And it makes it much more difficult for us to have civil discourse anywhere, but including in the workplace. And that employers are very actively trying to solve for the problem of ensuring civil dialogue and the right environment that's safe and productive and mutually respectful. So, I feel as though that we all as communicators, we all have some thinking to do and some collaboration perhaps amongst ourselves to really determine, how do we address the context as we go into a presidential election, even if we're really just focused on ensuring the success of our companies.
And if I can just jump in there real quick, and the idea that the context is going to constantly change. And I think we in the communication space have something unique here. It's something that you, I think, speak really well about in every single one of our conversations, and that is that we have the opportunity to solve a business problem here, but we also have the opportunity to solve a human problem. as it comes through this. And that we're not just talking about bottom line. We are talking about bottom line. We're also talking about the cost to the humans in the loop.
Yeah.
It's something that I think you speak so well to, but it's so real. And as we look at 2024, we're not just trying to survive a hurricane. We're also trying to make sure that the people who we work alongside are okay at the end of the day. And that's something that's very real, and it's new, I think, to our space for the scale that it's at.
Yeah.
But it's a tough part of the world.
We haven't talked about deep fakes yet, but there was an article just a couple days ago in the Wall Street Journal that maybe some of you saw about a high school in Westfield, New Jersey that's just being torn apart because there are deep fakes of the girls, young girls, 14-year-old girls, and some of the students are creating false pornographic images of these girls. And to read about what those little young girls are going through, what their parents are going through, they understand that these images are fake, but they also understand that they can't control them. And what does that mean for a 14-year-old girl's future? And how do you even begin to get your head around that? So, for me, that was that article stopped me in my tracks, and it was just, I found it incredibly distressing to even have to think about that, and yet that is, I think, rare enough that it deserves a Wall Street Journal article, but unfortunately, going forward, it may become more commonplace.
And I think the interesting thing about how rare it is that the acute nature of the impact is hopefully rare. I mean, it's just a horrendous situation, but the methodologies that were used are available to everybody with a laptop at this point, right? This is just so easy to deploy at this point that we don't know whether or not we'll walk away from the easy attack at this point as a society or not. And it's terrible. I think it's part of this issue that's scary. It's also part of being a part of the solution that's rewarding here, and that you do get to help humans, truly the humans. You get to look at somebody straight in the face and say, I can help you get you through this. And I think that's always been a great part of the communication space, but it's something that we've got to really lean into here. And we've got to remember that we're sitting next to people, not just logos this entire time.
I think that people are hoping that the legal and regulatory solution will eventually evolve, and you're a lawyer, so what do you think of the prospects for having more and better regulation and legal recourse for disinformation attacks?
So we're like 400 feet from the White House, right? And we just passed an executive order that is maybe the most broad sweeping American piece of policy that's going to happen in this space for the next 4 years. Interestingly enough, it now has a year to be effective. If anybody in this room can show me a policy that came out of any White House that was effective within a year, you should. I'd love to hear the example. So we're in a situation now where we've been able to get one policy out, and it is really unlikely to have broad sweeping effect because of the political dynamics with it. I think the other side of this that people just really need to bring into the policy component is that the rate of technological development is so unbelievably fast that it is forever going to outpace the regulatory environment.
Yeah.
We're going to be in a game of hydraulics here for the next decade at least. And if anybody's waiting for a regulatory silver bullet, I think you're waiting for Godot.
I want to go back to something that you said that was, I thought, one of the most important things that we can talk about as part of this session. And I'm going to paraphrase you, but I feel like what you said was you've observed that the companies that come out of a disinformation attack the most effectively are perhaps the ones who understood the risk and could spot it, but are also the ones who just have great systems for building trust with stakeholders, that are in regular communication, have well-developed platforms and channels for communication, have real relationships they can rely on, and have brand equity and reputational equity that they can draw from. Is that the right way to paraphrase what you said? Or?
It is. And I don't want to get too salesy, right? But this is one of the reasons we're really excited about partnering with Hill and Knowlton, right? And that technology is one piece of this equation, and if anybody ever looks at anybody in this room and says, I've got a tech solution for this problem, you should go look for someone else to talk to. Tech is a huge part of the enablement function, but the relationships and the human side of this and the advisory component is absolutely critical. And you have to be able to find a way to marry them two into the same offering that comes through, right? We all need help from a friend at a time, but at this point, you don't want to be in a point where you're under attack and you're trying to piece together a solution, right? And there's a multi-pronged component that needs to come through this, right? Boards have a role, right? And you sit on a public board, right? I'd love to ask you about your perspective from the public board. The brand and reputation side of this are going to have a role, and you're going to have some of the most aggressive technology for monitoring and analysis that's out there, and have a very easy, quick ability to deploy that alongside advisory and companion services and in-house services at the same time. You're going to be under attack. That's the reality. And you don't want to be under attack without a plan. And it's one of the reasons that, that I'm truly excited about what we're building together, because we are building this from both sides. And I think that uniform approach is really the only way to go through it.
Well, thank you. And a couple things about that. I mean, I wanted to double click on that because I actually wanted to encourage everyone in this room. Some people are in agency roles like I am, and others are clients and, are in big corporations or responsible to CEOs and other executives for solving important communications problems. And I've had that job too, so I have a lot of empathy coming from me. And I just think that it's just a great, when you talk to your clients or you talk to your key executives about what you need to get done as a communications leader, solving for risk is a big part of what you need to get done. And a big part of a great defense is a great offense, right? And so having quality strategies and quality means of engaging with your stakeholders and building reputation and trust over time is only becoming more important, because as the risks grow, so does the need for reputational capital and for those kinds of relationships. To answer your question about what the board world is like on this topic. Yeah. One thing that I think has been really interesting about boards, as we all know, a lot of the work of governing boards gets done in committees. And what I've observed is that certain companies now are forming committees, or they are changing the charter of existing committees to take on reputation risk more directly. So we see this in banking. We see it a little bit in healthcare. We see it with some really big consumer packaged good companies where they know that their stakeholder relationships and their reputation risk is highly material, and it can no longer be managed as just a normal operating outcome of doing business well, and that it needs focused attention. I know a really big pharmaceutical company that has made reputation risk a part of their audit committee's activity, and they review their reputation data a couple times a year with their audit committee. So in general, I feel like the governance environment is becoming far more attuned to reputation risk, and it's not everybody by a long shot, but it's just been, as one indicator of how things are changing, it's been interesting to see how the committee structures are changing. I think what that means, though, is that when there's an issue like this, it's not the board's job to manage an issue. As a disinformation risk percolates, it's not their job to make sure that but it's their job to make sure that they have an executive leadership team that is equipped to handle that risk, and that they can feel confident that the leadership team understands the risk, has methods for managing it, and ultimately will protect the company's valuation, and so that the board can focus on long-term sustainable value creation. When it starts to become a problem, when it breaks through as a material issue, when it's not managed, or when it becomes really injurious to the company, then it becomes a more active issue for the board to get directly involved in. In the governance networks that I'm a part of, disinformation comes up a lot. Your comparison to cyber was interesting, and it's not at the pitch of cyber, but it's percolating as a topic. In other words, when public company directors get together and talk about what matters right now in governance or what problems they're solving, or what they need to learn more about. Disinformation is a part of that conversation. But I don't hear a lot of solutioning. I feel like it's sort of still in the realm of, this is a huge risk to our companies, it's a really big problem, it's another thing that we have to understand and find ways of mitigating. I think geopolitics has really kind of taken all the oxygen out of the room right now. You know what I mean? In the conversations that I'm in, people are extremely focused on geopolitical risk and what that means for their businesses. But this is actually also a part of geopolitics. And how do you put those two themes together?
I mean, I think, right, like, welcome to the multipolar world, right? We used to live in a unipolar world, we moved to a bipolar world, and now we're in a multipolar world. And now geopolitics are a huge part of risk. I mean, it's I think, encouraging to hear, right, from your perspective, right, the boards are focused on it. But let's make no mistake, geopolitical risk and mis and disinformation and harmful narratives are all in the same category of evaluation. We often actually overlap the two when we look at it at Pendulum, at least. And I think one of the things that we see is that it's not just major world events, right? We talked a little bit about what the world is like today, or, we've got two major conflicts in Europe going on, we've got elections going on, we have bank runs going on at the same time. But now what we're also seeing is the multipolarization of the world and the balkanization of both resources and perspectives in the world. But that doesn't mean that companies stopped being multinational, right? It doesn't mean that all of a sudden companies are somehow only addressing markets that are somehow aligned with one individual philosophy. And not for nothing, but those philosophies changed at the beginning of this year, and they're going to change again. And we actually have very little. Our friends in the five-sided building down the hall will publish some information here on a regular basis called the National Defense Strategy, and they will increasingly talk about how there's very little certainty, actually, about where this is going. And I think that we have to understand that we love to think about mis and disinformation in terms of, hey, there's this big thing about me that is demonstrably false and I need to get out in front of it. And in some way, truth is a nexus to where this comes from. But that's not the case anymore. In the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we saw the largest mass exodus of Western companies pulling out of an operating environment as Israel and Gaza takes place. It's the very similar playbook taking place. And then what we're seeing is that companies are not only choosing to be involved in conversations, but they're being forced to be involved in conversations. And I think the thing that is truly the nugget that we have to focus on is that the world is so unbelievably small from a communication standpoint. The biggest producer of open source intelligence in Russia and Ukraine is TikTok. That is the same platform that is producing dance videos and creating viral food sensations, and it is the same thing that I have a phone somewhere on me that's in my pocket. It's the same thing that is sitting on this phone right here, and it sits on every single individual across the world's phones as well. It is the biggest and most vocal mouthpiece of all time. It is also something that can drag your executives, your company, and your brand into something, whether or not you had anything to do with the conflict. And there are huge examples, right? Like McDonald's is very public about their pullout from Russia, right? They had to release all of their holdings in the Ukraine, in the Russian area, in the Ukraine conflict. But it doesn't have to be that dramatic. And I think that what we're seeing, at least, is that you're in the conversation whether or not you choose to be. Full stop. End of story. If there's a world event that is going to get decent traction, people are starting to look at a response. And the number of companies that can get away with saying nothing, doing nothing, or having no response is minuscule. There are a couple, right? There are a couple that seem to have positioned themselves into like this inoculated position, but it is not something that we see as repeatable. And as we look at this, right, the question is, as we look at 2024, as we look at 2023 into 2024, into 2025, if you're going to constantly be dragged into conversations, both from a customer perspective, but then as something that you talked about before, your own employees' perspective, you have to be ready. But you also have to be ready for something that's going to change at the rate of a TikTok video. and they're only a minute long.
Yeah. Talk about needing to be an athlete. Yeah, exactly. Okay, I've just been inspired to do something that is low tech and analog. But it's an audience survey. So I wanted to, by show of hands, if you don't mind, how many of us in the room have had to address a disinformation attack at work? Just show of hands. Okay, so I would say roughly, what, like 15%?
Yeah.
Like roughly 15%. How many expect that in the next year that you likely will need to get involved in working a disinformation attack? Interesting, okay. A little bit more, not quite half.
Yeah.
Not quite half.
40, yeah.
Okay, we're gonna come back next year and see, and see what happened. Is there anything else that you would like to cover or share with the audience?
I think this is the thing that I always like to share, right? Because this is a conversation full of doom and gloom, and quite frankly, it should be, right? Like, part of this issue is understanding that, like, we're all about to be in crisis, or we are already in crisis, and that we have to not freak out, but we have to understand what the landscape looks like. And I will tell you, when 2017, one of the things that we really struggled with was that even the government was a little slow to understand it was in crisis. And I'm not talking about the political arms of the government, I'm talking about the defense parts of this. And we don't want to be caught in that situation, right? So I think the thing that I always love to share in this is that we have to know what's going on. And quite frankly, we have to start gathering the resources, the partnerships and the offerings or the partners or the know-how that we can to be informed in this conversation. But at the same time, we also know how to handle crisis. We know how to build playbooks. This shouldn't be all doom and gloom.
No.
This should be something that we are able to build on what we've known. And if we do the work between now and whenever you get hit, you'll be ready and you'll get through it. But don't go down some silver bullet road of technology or regulation. Don't go down some road of like deep science that's gonna try to pull you out of the situation or something like that. Trust what you know and augment that with the best partners and resources that you have, and you'll get through this.
It's not a time for pessimism, it's a time for realism.
I love that, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I love that.
And that was your Oppenheimer session. So thank you. Thank you so much, Mark. I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you so much.